Hello and welcome on this eve of Guy Fawkes. How lovely to be in the chic nook that is Paul Smith Mayfair. My name is Genevieve Gaunt, and in collaboration with Paul Smith and A Rabbit's Foot, the film and culture magazine, it is my delight to be here interviewing Elizabeth Day. Elizabeth Day is a journalist, novelist, broadcaster, and podcast queen. After growing up in Northern Ireland, she went on to read history at Queen's College, Cambridge, where she graduated with a double first. Her debut novel won a Betty Trask Award in 2011, and since then she's gone on to publish 10 books, 6 fiction and 4 non-fiction. Now, with a very successful career, beauty, and brains, it appears that Elizabeth Day is the woman who has it all. But in 2018, she launched a podcast called How to Fail, all about failure. It became a chart topper, and since then she's interviewed over 400 A-list celebrities, everyone from Pamela Anderson to Yuval Noah Harari. Last year, she was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. And breaking news, as of yesterday, which I learned from her Instagram, she has launched her imprint, Big Day, in collaboration with Fourth Estate Books, which is a huge achievement. And as if all of that wasn't enough, tonight we are here to celebrate her 10th book and 6th novel, One of Us, a state of the nation political thriller, which Elizabeth has very kindly gifted everyone a copy here tonight. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Day.
Sorry. That was so impressive. Was there an auto cue, or you just, not only did you get every fact correct, which hardly ever happens, but to speak from memory in that way, and also with that glorious voice. And you've told me I can't make it about you tonight, but I do just have to say that Genevieve did me the honor of being one of the audiobook narrators for One of Us. And you did such a beautiful job as Fliss. And so it's so lovely to see the voice in a body and to meet you in real life. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. But, you know, Elizabeth is really the queen of podcasting and the queen of interviewing. So it's good I got my facts straight because you're the best.
Thank you.
But this is a tables turn situation because you have been on a huge press tour. Is this the kind of the end of the press tour? Like, what happens now?
So now I'm not traveling as much as I was. So you're right. I was lucky enough to do several dates around the country and in Ireland. But I have about 1 or 2 events a week now until Christmas. And I'm a glutton for punishment because I love doing them because I get to speak to amazing people like you and connect with this lovely audience. And I tend to say yes to everything because I also remember what it was like publishing books and no one being interested. And so I'm so overwhelmingly grateful that anyone is interested that I want to kind of fulfill that obligation. So yeah, until Christmas, I'm still doing an event a week, but it's mainly in London.
Let's go back to the beginning. It feels like your career as a novelist was inevitable. Am I right in thinking that you learned how to read and write at the age of 4 before school even started?
Yes, I do sound horrible and terribly precocious, but I promise you that it was basically thanks to my mother. So my mother taught me to read and write before I went to school. And one of my many privileges is that I grew up in a household where books were read voraciously. Both my parents are inveterate readers and they read to me and taught me about literature. And I remember thinking aged 4, which is quite strange, I want to write books. And there were no authors in my family, but I think it's just that I loved the physical object of a book because I associated it with that time with my mother. But also, I appreciated very early on what they could do for you, how you could escape into these flights of imagination and be somewhere else for a bit. And that just felt so beautiful to me. So, yeah, aged 4, I had this deep instinct that that's what I wanted to do, and I've stuck to it.
You were and are a voracious reader. Am I right in thinking that you devoured Agatha Christie?
Yes, I did. So aged 11, I kind of came across Agatha Christie. And I was going through a relatively tumultuous and slightly eccentric time in my home life. As you mentioned, I grew up in Northern Ireland. As you can hear, I speak with a very English accent. And at secondary school in Belfast in the early 1990s, it wasn't a great time to speak like this. And so I was a little bit bullied, and I ended up leaving halfway through the year. But I was a year ahead of myself academically. So I thought, yay, I get 6 months just lolling about at home and watching Neighbours at 5:35 p.m. But my parents had other ideas. And one of their slightly madcap ideas was to send me to Russia for a month to learn Russian, which they did. So age 12, I was packed off to Novgorod. And I did emerge fluent in Russian, much of which I've forgotten. But Agatha Christie saw me through. So the great thing about Agatha Christie is that she wrote so many books. And so I started when I was 11, but I didn't finish until I was 12. And I remember I used to mark each one out of 10 and give it a mini review on a sort of sheet of foolscap afterwards, because I just admired the construction of them, as well as the fact that they were so entertaining and involving, and her characterization is so deft. But the construction is what makes it so special. So yeah, I loved Agatha Christie.
Thinking of your podcast and the idea of failure, and as I'm sure lots of people here know, sometimes having challenges in life make you a greater artist, a more interesting, complex human being. And it links to this book, the idea of the outsider. Did looking at you, hearing you, you wouldn't think that you would feel like an outsider, but you were. And I want to link that to the character of Martin.
Definitely. It's one of the things that I have realized doing the podcast is that no matter how much people seem to have it all together, no matter how much we might look at someone and see them as this shimmering god on the red carpet, they too have failed. They too have often felt like imposters, because we live in a culture where we're constantly comparing our messy, flawed, neurotic insides, which we know only too well, with everyone else's projection of their exterior success. And that disconnect has fascinated me for a long time. And I'm so aware of the fact that it's absurd, my sitting here as a very privileged white middle class woman, to say I felt like an outsider. But contextually, I really did. So in Northern Ireland, I never fitted in. And then I won a scholarship to boarding school in England. And from the first day, I was accepted because of my accent. And yet I didn't know the rules there either, because I hadn't grown up there. And all of that feeling went into the character of Martin Gilmore, who is really the main protagonist of One of Us. It's a multi-voice narrative, but he's our gateway as the reader. And he is someone who, like me, got a scholarship to a boarding school, never fitted in, had quite a damaged upbringing, single mother, wrong side of the tracks. And at his elite boarding school, he becomes fixated with this wealthy, aristocratic character called Ben Fitzmaurice.
Because this is actually the sequel to The Party.
Yes.
Can you just go back a step and give people the kind of, well, you were kind of doing that anyway, but can you ground the novel?
Definitely. So The Party came out in 2017. You don't need to have read it to read One of Us. It makes total sense as a standalone. But if you do read The Party, or you have read it, then there's a fair few Easter eggs in One of Us. And The Party follows Martin as he goes to school, becomes obsessed with Ben Fitzmaurice, inveigles his way into the Fitzmaurice family. And then various things happen over the course of one night of Ben Fitzmaurice's 40th birthday party that mean that the friendship is shattered and that Martin is left hell-bent on revenge. So we open One of Us with Martin now 7 years on, still hell-bent on revenge. And now Ben Fitzmaurice is on course to become the next Tory Prime Minister. And Martin wants to bring him down. And he gets invited back into the Fitzmaurice family fold because Ben's older sister Fliss, voiced by the extraordinary Genevieve Gaunt in the audiobook, has very sadly died, but she does have a voice in the book. And so he gets invited to her funeral, much to his surprise, and then it's about what happens next.
And Richard Armitage is the voice of Martin.
Yes.
Who does a fantastic job.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking that this is your return to fiction after a few years of writing nonfiction?
Yes, so I never thought I was going to write nonfiction, but then I launched the podcast, and my editor at the time said, "I think you should write a book about failure." So
And
I
then it
did.
became a Sunday Times bestseller,
Yes.
as several of them have been Sunday Times bestsellers.
How to Fail was my first Sunday Times bestseller, so it felt very special. Um, and then I wrote another book about failure, and then I wrote a novel, and then I wrote another nonfiction about friendship called Friendaholic. And so this is my first novel since that nonfiction book. And I love writing novels. And I think if I'm forced to choose between the two genres, I would choose novel writing because I think you can express an essential truth that sometimes it's too scary to put in writing when you're writing as yourself. And so all of my characters, with the exception of maybe one utterly villainous cove in one of us, all of my characters are kind of aspects of me.
He was my favourite.
Stop it. No, he wasn't.
So, as Elizabeth says, there are 5 different perspectives in this book, and I heard you at a talk recently, and you used this fantastic expression, and you described it as polyphonic, which I thought was great. And you said that it was inspired by your love of cinema.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Because that idea of, we're in Paul Smith and there's art on the walls, and I love the way that film and fashion tie in together, and books are inspired by films and vice versa.
Yes, I am hugely inspired by cinema and actually anything that I watch on screen. So we might come on to it, my obsessive love for reality TV, but that genuinely, as a novelist, wanting to delve into the depths of character, reality TV at its best is an incredible resource. But I'm very influenced by what I see. And so I think I write quite visually as well. I always imagine a scene and then seek to describe it. And with One of Us and with The Party and a previous novel I wrote called Paradise City, I think I'm particularly influenced by the work of Robert Altman because I love his multi-narrative strands and how they intersect unexpectedly. So you start out at the beginning of one of his films, like Shortcuts, not understanding that how everyone connects, and then it's through the unfolding of the story that you get this very satisfying experience as a viewer of putting it all together. And I want to recreate that in books. And actually, I'm obviously not the first person to do it. Like another brilliant proponent of that in books is Maeve Binchy. I don't know how many people have, yay, there's someone nodding. Like so many female authors, incredibly underrated, but a brilliant proponent of that particular form.
Do you write? So we've got, Martin, Serena, Cosima, Fliss. I mean, do you write like one character all the way through and then cut it up, or do you switch as you're writing?
I switch as I'm writing. And part of the reason I do that is because it keeps my interest. And so, therefore, I hope it keeps the reader's interest as well. And because what each of the characters does at any given time affects the next character, just to keep it clear in my mind, that's how I do it. Having said that, the character of Fliss in the first draft was all in one big chunk. And actually, I realized as I got to the end of that draft that Fliss, in so many ways, is the moral heart of the book. And she's also the person who is treated as a scapegoat in the most awful ways by toxic, powerful men. And I realized that she needed to be seeded through the book from the beginning to give that sense that she was the one bearing the brunt of other people's problems.
But I mean, it sounds complicated thinking about the different strands, past, and of course it's a thriller, so you're delaying and deploying information. I'm sure there are writers. Well, I know there are writers in the room. How do you work? How do you structure? Do you use a particular, I don't know, like a particular tool or app or something? Like I know some historians use particular software and they put things in folders. And
Yeah.
how do you work? Do you have a method?
No, I definitely don't have an app or any software that I use because the idea of that terrifies and confuses me. I can't even navigate an Excel spreadsheet. So no. Um, I tend to think, as in, I sit with an idea for a while, and with One of Us, I was at a very specific geographical location when I came up with the idea and the plot, which was that one of my many good fortunes is that I occasionally get offered free trips places. And I got offered a free trip to an Austrian wellness clinic where it's run along fasting principles, which I hadn't fully anticipated when I said yes to it. I was like, yay, spa break for me. And then arrived at this very sort of rigorous place where you basically have to chew on a buckwheat cracker for at least sort of 15 chews, and you're not allowed to talk during meals or look at your phone or read. So I was sitting there staring out at a stunning view of an Austrian lake and these kind of mists unfurling against the trees in the background. And I started thinking about the plot of One of Us. And I would think about it meticulously every single mealtime. And then I would run back to my room and note it down. And by the end of that week, I knew more or less what was going to happen to each character. And that's the extent of the planning that I do. Because when I write fiction, it's very important for me to get into the head and the voice and the skin of a character and to understand then how they will act, because that will inform the plot. And in fact, many of my characters surprise me and then I have to change the ending, which is inconvenient, but that's how I do it.
On this press tour, you have worn some particularly fantastic outfits, and I know
Let's get
that
onto
you.
the real stuff.
Yeah, this is the real stuff. You work with a stylist, is that right?
I do now, because a bit like Excel spreadsheets, I find it overwhelming. Some people are amazing at it, and I bet you are, Genevieve. I find it overwhelming thinking of what to wear and put together for consecutive events over a short period of time.
No, I hate it. That's why we're here
It's very
doing Paul
difficult,
Smith,
I
because
know.
they dress us and it's just great.
Thank you, Paul Smith.
Thank you, Paul Smith.
It's almost like packing for a different kind of weather. I can never do it mentally. So yes, so there's this amazing woman called Annie Swain who came into my life and transformed it in so many really meaningful ways. And I think so, I mean, obviously not here because we're in Paul Smith, but a lot of people feel that clothing is trivial. And I think it's anything but, because the way that you present yourself to the world can really shape how you see yourself and how you show up. And, you know, I've said that I write very visually. So actually, how we dress is incredibly important in certain respects. And she's been so helpful in terms of my own confidence, actually. And she knows me almost best than anyone, I think. It's a sort of therapy through clothes.
Actually, I'm just reminded there was a line in the book that made me laugh out loud when I think Serena tries to put Fliss in an outfit and Fliss looks in the mirror and thinks,
She thinks she's an Eastern European dictator.
a doomed one.
Yes. She's wearing sort of gold brocade and she's very sort of constructed. And
Which is
yeah,
down to your point that if
Yeah.
someone, you need to feel comfortable in what you're wearing.
totally. Can we talk about Paul Smith here? Because I don't want to preempt the next question.
No.
So, Paul Smith, this is such a beautiful moment for me, not just because I get to meet Genevieve, but because when I launched How to Fail, my life was in a very different place. And I was still a freelance print journalist. And I'd just gone through a divorce, and then another relationship had ended out of the blue. And I was sort of grappling with fertility. And I launched How to Fail because I wanted to understand how other people coped with that sensation of failure. And very soon it became apparent that lots of people wanted to listen to it, which is an extraordinary gift and has changed my life in many ways. And Paul Smith were the first ever people who reached out to me and said, when you're doing your How to Fail live show, my first one was in March 2019 at the Rio Cinema in Dalston, with then a very little known actor called Shruti Gatwa. They said, we'd like to dress you. And they were amazing. And they gave me the most extraordinary tuxedo. And wearing a Paul Smith suit made me feel so confident and so able, really, primarily because, yes, you look great, but you also have pockets where you can put everything. And suddenly I was like, oh, this is why men have worn suits for centuries. Like, it makes sense. Your arms are free to do radical and powerful things. And then Paul Smith just did that for the next few shows, and I've still got a particular suit that I absolutely loved that I was explaining earlier was a sample and it never went into production, so it's a one-off. I've got it hanging in my wardrobe, so I'm very grateful.
Speaking of pockets,
Yes.
you have designed a line of clothes. Is this right?
Yes, although I have to say I was more the creative mood board, and I worked with an actual professional designer. for this clothing brand called Align, run by women for women. And I've been wearing their clothes organically anyway. And then they got in touch and they're like, would you be interested in doing this? And I said, yes, absolutely. And it was one of the most creatively satisfying experiences of my life, because I think obviously I love clothes, but also there's something very special about being able to design with people who are at the top of their game and then see something that existed only in your head on someone's body sort of 6 months later, and to see it on lots of different people's bodies. It was an amazing thing. And yet every single item has pockets.
Did they ever show you something and you were like, this is ugly as sin?
I didn't use those words, but yes. It wasn't quite ugly as sin, it just wasn't doing what I wanted it to do.
Did you try anything on and think, no way?
Yes, definitely. We struggled to get the right jeans for ages, and also
Oh yeah, that's hard.
it's so difficult.
Yeah.
And I also wanted women to feel good in the clothes, and so I wanted the sizing to be right, and I just wanted to make sure that nothing just kind of nipped in where it shouldn't do and stuff. So with the denim in particular, that was tricky. And there's also the opposite. There was also something that I saw in the design sketch stage where I was like, no, I don't like that. And then it was hanging on a rack when I went in for the fitting, and I was like, that is amazing, and did a total 180.
Can you, because if you look, it's spelled Align.
Yes.
Is it like Aligne?
Yes.
If you go onto the website, it's very enticing and it says it's going to drop in March 2026, but it won't tell you what pieces you have designed. Are you allowed to reveal any
Oh
of
no,
that?
this one drops this March, so it's already been and gone. Is it saying it's going to drop in March 26th? Maybe they know something I
Let's say
don't.
that it's the website's fault, not mine.
It's 100%. I
Is it out
believe
there?
you. It's out, but it's sold out. Sorry.
Maybe
So
that's why they don't. It's sold
yes,
out.
yes,
There we go.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if they did the Meghan Markle thing of like only having 2 pots of jam and then saying sold out. Yay! I'm a massive success. But yeah, it was great.
But this is actually not your first time designing stuff, because you have merch for your podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about this because I fell in love with these socks and Elizabeth is wearing them tonight.
Yes, I am at Genevieve's request. They are failure success socks. So one foot says failure and the other foot says success. Because, as Truman Capote said, failure is the condiment that gives success its flavour. They are actually shadow twins. They go together.
Another failure of a writer.
I know. What's he ever done?
I know what's
eh?
he done, exactly. Just to go back a step to art and influences on you, you mentioned Robert Altman and shortcuts, but we are partnering with A Rabbit's Foot, the film and culture magazine, and I'd love to know, what are your top 3 favourite films? Is that a hard question?
God, I love that question. No, it's
good.
great. No, because I'm living for the day where I get asked this by Letterboxd. Okay, yeah. So
She's ready.
in no particular order, the film adaptation of The Talented Mr. Ripley by Anthony Minghella, I think, is just an exceptional, exceptional movie. I think for a number of reasons. The adaptation is so well done because the novel by Patricia Highsmith is obviously brilliant and also an influence on me. But Minghella brings minor characters to the fore. So the Kate Blanchett character is very minor in the book, but she's so integral to the plot of the film. I also think every single actor in that movie is at the top of their game. The costume design, the cinematography, Matt Damon. I'll watch anything that Matt Damon's in. I think he's a superb actor. So for all of those reasons, I'm putting The Talented Mr. Ripley in there. Rear Window by Alfred Hitchcock. Again, James Stewart is an actor that I adore. I think visually, Grace Kelly's wardrobe. Has anyone seen Rear Window? Yeah, was so iconic and sort of set the tone for so much of fashion in that era. And I love the tightness of the structure and the plot. Here's my love of Agatha Christie coming to the fore again. The fact that the plot is James Stewart is a wall photographer and he's broken his leg and he's essentially bedbound. But as he's looking out of this window into the apartment complex, he thinks he sees a murder being committed. It's an amazing, amazing movie. And then I think I'm going to put in Phantom Thread, the Paul Thomas Anderson movie. Gosh, it's interesting how much fashion has like come into play for all 3
Well, that's
choices.
really strange. Do you know the Paul Smith connection?
No,
So this is not rehearsed.
it is not.
This is not rehearsed. So Daniel Day-Lewis shadowed Paul Smith in order to prepare for Phantom Thread.
God, it's like I'm
It's like,
embodied by some sort of spirit. Like, that's amazing.
please continue.
Well, yeah, I mean, that for me is an exquisite film. Everything about it, the storyline, the acting, the direction, the music, Johnny Greenwood's music, Daniel Day-Lewis, he's not bad at what he does, is he? I remember going to see that on my own in the cinema and being blown away by it. And the way that I can tell that I love a film is that then as soon as I leave, I listen to the soundtrack. And so I did that a lot. And I've just seen One Battle After Another, which I also really loved, but not as much as Phantom Thread. So I'm going to give you those three.
Thinking, I mean, you have interviewed so many huge A-listers, and at the beginning of your career, you interviewed Clint Eastwood, and you're very kind and generous, but don't be fooled. There's a very sharp and clever eye there, and you once interviewed the guy who wrote The Alchemist.
Paulo Coelho.
Yeah, I can't pronounce
My
it.
God,
Sorry,
I love that you know this. This is some deep research. Okay, yeah.
And you were absolutely you were not letting him get away with much on that one. And can you tell everyone about that interview?
Yes, with apologies for anyone who feels The Alchemist is their favourite book. There are very few people that I dislike, actually. Because I generally think if you're asking the right questions and you're curious about someone, then you can grow to understand them. And that's why I think there's no such thing as an unlikable character. There's just a bad storyteller. But Paulo Coelho was pretty awful. And I interviewed him. Is he anyone's godfather? Is he like, okay. I interviewed him quite a few years ago, so I'm sure maybe he's changed. Just riddled with caveats. Maybe he was in a bad mood, and I just remember him. I just felt he was bogus, and I remember him talking about the importance of listening to his intuition. And he gave this example that I think he believed painted him in a very positive light. And he said, recently I was on a flight back from Brazil to London, and I got on the flight and I lit a cigarette. And the air stewardess said that it wasn't allowed. And I said, what do you mean it's not allowed? My soul wants to smoke a cigarette. She's like, I'm very, very sorry, but it's just like it's illegal on flights. He's like, I don't care because this is what I need to do right now. I need to smoke a cigarette. He said, and you won't believe it. They marched me off the flight and I had to smoke my cigarette on the tarmac. And then I got back on the flight and it was delayed because I'd had to smoke a cigarette and it was very inconvenient to me. And I was like, that's so bizarre that at no point has he thought his need to smoke a cigarette made all of those people who were already in the flight late, very late. And it just kind of blew my mind that he was masking this act of supreme narcissistic selfishness as listening to his soul. And since then, I've always disliked him. And actually, this is possibly TMI, but I mentioned a fertility journey that I've been on. And it's at an end now, and I'm really at peace with it. But my husband and I did a round of egg donation. And we did it in LA because fertility medicine is much more advanced there. And in America, there are very different rules for egg donation. So over here, it's anonymous and you don't get paid, you just get expenses covered. Over there, it's anything goes. Like you can pay from $5,000 to $60,000 and you get presented with reams and reams of photos. It's a bit like a dating app. It's really extraordinary and slightly sinister. And so we were going through this catalogues of amazing women, and they also answer questionnaires. And one of the questions is often, what's your favourite book? And I'm afraid to say that I discounted automatically anyone who said either The Alchemist or Harry Potter. And it was quite a few. And anyway, and here I am with no baby. But that's fine, because if I'd had a baby whose mother genetically liked The Alchemist as their favourite book, I don't know if I'd bond.
It's funny.
Sorry.
I love that.
It was also Pinochet's favourite book, by the way, The Alchemist, which I think it tells you something. Anyway, I'll stop now.
This is the skill of a very good journalist. Elizabeth said something about this writer, and it stuck with me. You said something about the kettle. What did you say? You said that he had all the spirituality of a broken kettle.
I feel so bad.
Which I just,
I do.
which
I should say.
I love
It
that.
does belong to an earlier phase of my career when I think I was guilty of trying to be taken seriously and noticed as a feature writer. And I think I was meaner to some people than I should have been. And I really deeply regret that. But it's all a learning curve. And now, having done those interviews, and they belong to my past, but I think it's made me so much more aware that the best way to get to know someone is, as Sir David Frost said, is to approach them with honey rather than the fly swatter.
But do you have tricky interviewees now, and how do you deal with them?
Actually, much less. And I think it's partly because podcasting is such an intimate form where any guest knows that all I have as material are their words as they say them. Whereas as a print journalist, you are obviously in the position of selecting quotes. And if you're a nefarious print journalist, you might decontextualize them and slap an unfriendly headline on. So I noticed very early on that people were more willing to open up in the podcast form.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that the more How to Fail has become known, the more people understand the premise. And I ask people in advance of each recording to give me 3 times they failed in life or what they perceive of as failure.
Mm-hmm.
And so they sort of set the parameters of the conversation. But yes, I do occasionally, I wouldn't say they're tricky interviews, but sometimes I get people who are more guarded than others. And that's my job as an interviewer, to make them feel safe enough and seen enough that hopefully they feel able to be more vulnerable and open up.
You mentioned your husband and dating apps, and you have written so well and extensively about the process of dating. Can you tell us about some, I don't know, any singles in the audience or people on the dating apps? Like, can you tell us about some of those early bad dating stories?
Definitely. Okay, so potted personal history. From the age of 19 to 36, I was in a series of long-term monogamous relationships. And so I had never really been on a date, let alone a dating app. So then I found myself single, aged 36, which, spoiler alert, is not a great time for a straight woman to be single. And I was also, actually, no, sorry, then I got into another relationship. So I was properly single when I was like 39. And I was so panicked because I felt I was staring down the barrel of my 40s with none of the things that I thought I wanted in place. And so I really approached it quite strategically. I was like, I just need to get on the apps and I need to get through as many people as possible to find the person. And looking back on it, it makes for humorous anecdotes. But actually, during the time I was going through it, and my heart goes out to anyone who is going through it right now, it's really difficult to keep your sense of self and a negligible sense of self-esteem whilst you're being rejected left, right, and centre. So I did have some terrible but now amusing stories, including one man who I met and was extremely keen very early on, which should have been a red flag. But because I was feeling so needy and wretched, I was like, this is amazing. Someone is making all of my decisions for me. And he was quite sort of possessive in a scary way. And then on our 3rd date, I think it was, he came round to my flat and buzzed on the buzzer downstairs. And he was like, oh, come downstairs. I need you to help me with something. At which point I genuinely thought, is he an axe murderer or a serial? I don't know this person well enough. And yet I'm going down to the street. And he had this sort of bundle that he took out of his parents' car, red flag number 2. And he got me to help him with it upstairs. And when we were in my flat, he unrolled it and it was a futon that he was going to sleep on. I was like, why have you bought a camp bed? He was like, oh, because I find your mattress incredibly uncomfortable. And so I need to sleep on this futon. And to my shame, sorry, I'm so sorry that this is like a lovely audience. And I'm about to say, we had sex and then he just kind of rolled off onto the futon, like next to the bed, like a sort of faithful hound, and spent the night like that because he had like lumbar problems. And I remember thinking, well, it's good that I'm with someone who knows his lower back needs so well, and he's not afraid to sort of meet them. And then I woke up in the middle of the night and sat bolt upright in my bed and just thought, this man cannot be my boyfriend. And the next day, we met up. Where he went back to his, and then we met up. I was like, I need to talk to you. And I said, I'm really sorry. It's not you, it's me. And I'm not ready. And he said, well, at least as long as you don't change your mind in 6 months, because by then your ovaries sort of dried up and I won't be interested anymore. Red flag number 3. And I was so relieved that I was out of it. I wrote about it all in How to Fail under a pseudonym. And then he emailed me after that. Yeah. And anyway, I won't go into that, didn't reply.
What was the tone of the email?
The tone of the email was very much like, well, I have my version of events. And if I had a book, I would write my version of events. And my response to that internally was, we don't have a book. So you can't. And I actually do think there's something very important about having the right to tell your story, particularly as women. Like, we have the right to tell our stories. Otherwise, other people are going to tell it for us.
By the way, I will open it out to the audience for some questions in a bit. So get thinking. But this does have these trials have a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
You've been with your husband Justin for 7 years.
March 2018, yeah, 7 and a bit years.
Can you tell us about that? Because it feels like it almost didn't happen. You kind of really, like it's a lovely story.
I love how known I feel by you. Thank you. Yes. So because I was going through this sort of dating hellscape, and I've always loved LA. It's where I went after my divorce. It's the city that put me back together. It's an amazing place to write outside in the sunshine, and much of the party was written there. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to move to LA full time. And I booked my flights on a Thursday morning. And that evening, I had this date with this guy from this new app called Hinge. That's how long ago it was. And I was like, I just need to get this out of the way. Like, there's no chemistry there. He seems sort of slightly odd and lacking in humor over text, but he's like texting me every day wanting to meet up, and that's so odd because I was so used to emotional fuckwittage that it felt sort of very unchic of him to be so present and communicative. So I was like, I'll just get this date out of the way and then I'll get on with my fabulous new life. And I walked into this hotel bar at 5 p.m. and my life changed. And there was this kind of immediate sense that this was something important. And it was partly because the photos he'd uploaded onto Hinge were very unflattering. And in person, he's very handsome. So that got my attention. And then we got on really well. And one of the things that I really appreciated about him and still do is that he's interested in asking questions. I used to go on dates and be accused of asking too many questions, but that's because I wasn't getting anything back. So, and it's an occupational hazard if you're an interviewer that you do get given the conversational load. But he asked great questions and listened to the answers. And so I'm very glad that I gave Hinge a shot.
Did you cancel that one-way ticket to LA?
Yes, that's a great question. I didn't cancel it immediately because I was like, who knows? And about 3 months into dating, I remember saying to Justin, oh, do you know, I've got this ticket. I'm probably going to move full time to LA, but now I don't know. And I thought I wanted him to step in and say, well, of course you can't. You're amazing. We have to be together. And he didn't do that. He said, oh, yeah, that's tricky. That's a decision I can't make for you. And I was like, gosh, that's an enlightened adult who's giving me my own agency. And so I made my own decision in the end. And I was like, I'll still take that flight, but I'll make it into a month-long trip rather than full-time. And in that month, I wrote the book, How to Fail. So very grateful for that month in LA.
Given your philosophy and this idea of anti-perfectionism, it feels like your journey into anti-perfectionism allowed this love affair to blossom, because I don't know, sometimes we have ideas about what we want, and even the kind of parameters that you can set on Hinge, he wasn't. I feel, is that right?
Yes, and that's an incredibly astute point. I often think with real love, it's not the thing that you think you want. It's the thing that you actually need. And it's often not the thing that feels familiar, because familiar can be toxic. It can be being treated badly in the past, and that comes to feel customary. And with Justin, I changed the parameters on the app. And I changed the upper age limit, which always makes him sound like he's 95. He's not. He's only 4 years older than I am, but I was clearly only willing to date up to my age. And that's when he kind of came up. And when I met him, he wasn't, although there was immediate chemistry, it took a while for us to work out who we each were, because we'd both been damaged and bruised by past relationships. He was married before as well. He has 3 kids, so he had to be really cautious about things. He doesn't like texting, the weirdo. He would call me and I'd be like, why are you calling me when you could just as easily text me a mini essay? And so that it took us a while to kind of get used to each other's communication styles. But you're so right that that whole investigation into failure, which I was just starting then, did make me understand that perfectionism and seeking the perfect, you're seeking something very boring and very unemotional, actually. There's no point of connection if someone or something is perfect, and it doesn't exist. And so I suppose it made me so much more tolerant of flaws, primarily my own.
If anyone is on that dating process, Elizabeth has 10 dating commandments, and there's one that I particularly like, dating commandment number 6, which is all dating failure is data acquisition,
Yes,
which I love.
true. All failure actually is data acquisition, but particularly with dating. So I understood about sort of 6 months in that when I was getting rejected, that was an opportunity for me, um, obviously to self-reflect, but it was also an opportunity for me to think what had gone wrong and what I wanted differently next time. The kind of relationship I did want rather than the one that I didn't, that had sort of cancelled itself out. And so actually that idea of data acquisition is very powerful. Every time you fail or you make a mistake, you can acquire necessary data about what to do differently next time. And sometimes the most meaningful data you acquire is simply that you survived something you didn't think you were going to be able to. And that in turn makes you feel stronger, and it kind of makes you know yourself better. And those dating commandments, by the way, if anyone is going through this right now, I did a spin-off called How to Date, and it's 8 episodes that teach you everything you need to know and hopefully make you feel better about the dating jungle as it exists in 2025. And those commandments came out of that. So my co-host is Mel Schilling, who some of you might know is the Married at First Sight expert, and she's brilliant and so insightful about all of this.
You mentioned that you had your first date with Justin, your husband, at a hotel bar.
Yes.
I'm dying to know, what is Elizabeth Day's poison of choice?
Oh, another great question. Now it is a dirty vodka martini, extra dirty and extra briny. At the stage that I was dating Justin, it was one of those mad hotel bars where they call themselves mixologists, and there's like a 45-page menu, which is like carrot and mushroom tequila, um, presented with a shrimp foam. So we were ordering each other drinks on that. But at that stage, I was into gimlets, and then I went through a margarita phase. But I'm definitely like a sour cocktail gal.
We'll open up to some audience questions.
Yay.
Oh, we have a roving mic.
Hello.
Really great talk, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
How would you say space and place your creativity? And how was Clint Eastwood as well?
How would I say space and place encourages my creativity?
Yeah, like
What an amazing question. Yeah. Um, hugely. So when I started writing books, I had a full-time job at The Observer as a staff feature writer. And I didn't really have the opportunity to go to some writer's turret and just emote. And so I had to write where and when I could. So I would go to cafes and I would write on trains and on planes. And I actually found that I really enjoyed being around the murmur of other people. And it's something that I've stuck to this day. So if I'm writing a book, I'll generally go out to a coffee shop, to the extent that during lockdown, when everything shut down, I had to get into that zone. So I found this YouTube video, which was like 9 hours of coffee shop sounds. And it's an amazing kind of white noise. And when lockdown lifted and the coffee shops opened again, I went back to one and it was too noisy. And so I put in my AirPods and I listened to the YouTube video while I was in the cafe. So that's very important to me. But at the beginnings and ends of books, and if I'm experiencing a sort of tricky middle passage, I do like to go away somewhere and just be writing. And very often I will go to LA because I find it so creatively inspiring. I also recently bought myself a little cottage with the money that I'd set aside for fertility treatment. And the first thing I did when I bought that cottage was to get a desk built under the stairs. And the second thing I did was to get it painted that exact blue of that staircase, that kind of Eve Klein lapis lazuli, because I love that colour and it really inspires me. And so that desk has become an incredibly important space for me. And the second part, what was Clint Eastwood like? So it was my first major film star interview. I was 29 and I got flown to New York, and it was a junket for a movie he directed called The Changeling. And I was absolutely petrified. I'd been given 20 minutes in the middle of a very busy day that he had of interviews. As I was waiting to go into the hotel room, Angelina Jolie just wafted past, the most beautiful woman in the world, joint equal with Genevieve Gaunt. And so I was really nervous about it, and I thought really hard about my questions. And then I went in and he was unbelievably nice to me. He was so charming and kind, and we overran by another 20 minutes, so he doubled my time. He was also funny. And
Did he hit on you?
no, no one's ever hit on me in an interview, which I'm annoyed about. So that's how Polly Sanson met her husband. Anyway, Dave Gilmore, the niche reference. He was just lovely, and that was before he turned into a mad Republican. But I will always feel so grateful to him.
Yeah,
Real charisma.
Great question. I have a burning one that I haven't asked you yet. Now, as I said in my introduction,
Oh yeah.
Elizabeth has a double first in history from Cambridge, and your podcast, you've had these incredible guests. If you could go in a time machine, which historical character would you most like to have on How to Fail?
Brilliant question. Dan, do you know what I'm going to say? Yeah. Dan Jones has an amazing history podcast called This Is History, produced by Sony, which is where I'm produced by. And he knows this about me. We were at Cambridge together. I would have Richard III on because I don't think he murdered the princes in the tower. Dan disagrees with me, but that's because he's fallen for Tudor propaganda. And I would have Richard III on because I think Tudor propaganda and Shakespeare did him a massive disservice, and Henry VII had the most to gain from murdering those princes. So that's who I would have on.
I think you've spent too long saying that people are misunderstood and
Apart from Paulo Coelho, who I understood only too well.
Do we have any other? Yes.
I was thinking about how your podcast is like very reflective on failures in the past, but do you have any advice for at the time when you feel like you are failing?
Any advice for when you're feeling terrible in the moment?
Definitely. The first thing I'd say is that it doesn't make you alien from the rest of the human race, because I think so often failure lies to us and it makes us feel so isolated. It's actually something that will connect you so deeply with so many. I think the other thing is that you need to have compassion for yourself when you're going through something. You don't have to feel better immediately, and you don't have to bounce back immediately. And I'm not sitting here as an advocate of saying, everything can be easily bounced back from, because failures are different in so many myriad ways. And it might be that you will never overcome a failure. My self-perceived failure to have children is something that will be with me for the rest of my life. And it will always cause me sadness. And I've learned that I can be at peace with that too, because feeling that sadness is also part of being human. And so I think showing yourself a lot of gentleness and compassion, and understanding that sometimes you just have to sit with it and get through it. And if you have the courage to get through it, then I promise you it will teach you something so meaningful in the fullness of time. And it might be, as I said earlier, that the only meaningful thing it teaches you is that you are strong enough to survive it. But that in and of itself is an extraordinary thing. And then when you are at that stage, having the courage to speak out about it or to share your experience, I've found is an extraordinarily cathartic thing. And it's very empowering because the things that I feared were my most unique personal shame to carry, when I did start talking about them, turned out to have far more universal resonance than I could ever have imagined. And that in turn has this beautiful effect of making me feel that I belong to a community and that there is great solidarity in that. And so that's what I would say is like, go easy on yourself and have faith that in the fullness of time it will teach you something.
Thinking of psychoanalysts and that sage advice, didn't you have Stephen Gross on your...
Yes, I
And
love that man.
he's an eminent psychoanalyst, British, and he called Elizabeth the professor,
A failure.
which is quite
Yeah.
which is quite an interesting... I mean, it's such a compliment from...
It's a huge compliment from...
He's saying that you're part way to becoming a psychoanalyst in terms of the way that you're asking questions. Is that something that maybe at some point in your life you actually considered training to be a psychoanalyst?
I haven't ever. I take it as the biggest compliment if I'm asked that. Or I've had a few therapists on the podcast, and if they say that, and I've also had people come up to me saying that their therapist has recommended my work, and that's a great, great honor.
Because it makes people feel less alone.
Yes, and also a therapist for me are my heroes. You know, I'm still in fortnightly therapy, and I don't know what I would do without that, because it just helps you make sense of life and what it is to be here. So I've never considered it, but I would also never say never. My best friend is a therapist, which is a great combination to having a best friend, like someone who knows you so well, but can also call you out on your dysfunction.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up in a moment. I did have one. I haven't asked anyone before. I was thinking of, you know, Paul Smith, art, fashion, cinema, writing. There are a lot of icons and legends and people who are very good at what they do at the top of their game that we've been talking about. If you could like wave a magic wand and take a feature or a skill from a legend or a famous person, whether it's, I don't know, Elton John's fingers or Einstein's brain or Jennifer Lawrence's nose, or like, you know, is there something that you would like, that you would, you know, a skill or an ability or...
It would be bad to say Cindy Crawford's beauty, wouldn't it? Like, I won't say that. I try as much as possible not to compare myself, which is a fool's errand, because it's also how we understand who we are. Because the reason I try not to compare myself is because it makes me depressed that I'm not as good as so many other writers. But a writer who I think is incredible and whose work has really influenced mine and who I sort of aspire to is Tom Wolfe. And so if I could write like Tom Wolfe wrote The Bonfire of the Vanities, I'd be extremely happy.
What are you working on next, novel or book-wise? Can you tell us?
Yes, I'm writing a new novel, which I've only just started. So it's in the very early percolation stages, but it is set in LA. So I'll have a lot more research trips to
Exciting.
come. And very excitingly, The Party is being adapted for TV, and they have started filming. In fact, I've just been texting today to see whether I can be an extra in one of the scenes. So I can be, which is great. So that's brilliant, because I'm sure many creatives here will know it is so difficult to get anything made for TV. And it's
Are you
finally
allowed to
happening.
announce maybe who's attached or in it, or is that not released quite yet?
It's not released quite. I have to wait until Thursday,
Which-
annoyingly.
It will probably be on your socials and
Yes.
Instagram.
Oh,
Okay,
definitely.
so
Our
if you're
socials are-
interested, you can follow up
Yeah.
there. And as I also mentioned at the beginning, the last point, it's quite a massive thing to start your own imprint.
Well, I'm really excited about
Yeah,
it.
can you...
Well, I'm extremely lucky that I get to do it in collaboration with my publishers, Fourth Estate, and my editor, Michelle Kane, who is a powerhouse. And really, it's them who've put in all of the effort. And it was our joint idea, and I've had a lot of fun seeing how my surname, which is a noun, can be used in multiple ways for different aspects.
Yeah.
So the imprint is called Big Day.
And then there's Daylight Productions.
Daylight Productions, yes.
It's a good surname. Your parents knew what
They
were
knew
doing.
what, yeah. My memoir will be Day by Day. You see, it's all planned out.
Are you going to write a
No,
memoir?
I know. I mean, maybe when I'm 95, if I'm lucky enough to get us that age. But yeah, it's such a passion project for me because I love books. I love storytelling and I love connection. That's the thing that is the link between everything that I do. But books in particular, writing them, reading them, finding people through them, finding ourselves in the pages of a book, finding out what it is to be human. That's what Big Day's about. And so we're very excited, and we are launching, and I can announce it, with a book by a new writer called Rebecca Coxon. Her background is as a documentary maker, and it's called Inconceivable. And it tells the story of her doing a 23andMe DNA test and finding out that her father was not her biological parent, that actually she was conceived by donor. And then it follows her journey as a woman who struggles with fertility, who has endometriosis, who becomes a donor herself, and then her struggle to conceive her own family. And it's beautifully written. And for me, obviously, it has such meaning. And I felt so understood when I read it. It's incredibly moving, it's profound, it's illuminating, and it's just beautifully expressed. So it couldn't be a better title for us.
I think that's an exclusive. I don't think anyone knows that.
No
yet.
one knows that. It's a Genevieve Gaunt exclusive.
No, it's a You All Paul Smith exclusive.
Yeah.
And just to go back, what is the title of your upcoming book? Do you have it yet?
Oh, I don't have it yet. Titles are really
TBC.
tricky. I always thought I'd be really great at titles, but they actually take a bit of time to get right.
And do publishers sometimes say, no,
Some-
different one?
Sometimes they'll be, well, my first novel, I had a terrible title. I called it Other Women to begin with, and someone pointed out that it sounded like Loose Women. And no shade to Loose Women, which is a TV show that I love, Denise Welsh forever. But it did sound like a daytime TV show. And so my then editor suggested Scissors, Paper, Stone, because it's about a sort of triangular relationship, and I really like that. I've got gradually better, but I tend to find that they only come to me when I've written maybe 3/4 of the book.
Well, as I said, Elizabeth has very sweetly gifted everyone a copy, so I hope you will enjoy it. Please join me in thanking Elizabeth.